So today, the title of today's talk with you, Dr. Jenny Goodman, is, well, it's really a celebration of your book, Getting Healthy in Toxic Times. We've got books over here. If you want to have a little flick through at any point, please do feel free to get up and have a flick through and then have a chat with Jenny afterwards.
And Melissa's delicious recipe book as well.
That's very kind of you to say, but really we're here for you, Jenny.
I mean, the book itself isn't delicious, you don't eat it, but the recipes in it.
Imagine an edible book.
Yeah.
That would be quite fun. So this is Jenny's second book, Getting Healthy in Toxic Times. Your first book, has anyone read the first? Okay, we've got, brilliant. Excellent.
I read it every time with the seasons change, and I just double check. It's like, what do I need to be doing? What vitamins do I need to be doing?
Thank you.
That's amazing. Okay, so pleased to hear it. I agree. That's how I discovered you. Somebody got in touch with me and said, would you be interested, well, they knew I'd be interested, in a book that would be fun, not fear-mongering, informative, and I would say that you have done it again even more beautifully now. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself briefly, purely because you have so many assets. I don't want to get them wrong, and just tell us a little bit about how you got started, what made you sit up and wake up and start again, well, in addition to what you're already doing in ecological medicine.
Thank you, Melissa. Gosh, hard to know where to begin. I think I have to begin when I was 7 years old and wanted to be a doctor when I grew up. Because my own doctor was a man, and I sort of imagined that's what I'd look like when I grew up to be a doctor. But then I didn't have any female role models. I still didn't when I got to medical school. And after about, well, the first 5 years, I started to feel there was something missing. There was something wrong with the training. I mean, I learnt brilliant stuff to do in emergencies. I loved working in A&E, which was called Casualty. That tells you how long ago it was. But nobody was asking the question, why are all these people being brought into the wards with chronic, debilitating illnesses? And clearly things that have been building up over decades. And I used to ask on the wards, why has this happened, sir? It was always sir. And not only were there no answers, but the very question felt taboo. And in fact, one of my professors said to me in my fourth year, we do not inquire about causes. We leave that to the epidemiologists. Our job is to treat our patients. So fast forward about 40 years, and the level of chronic degenerative diseases in our society has gone through the roof. And I spent 25 years in clinical practice doing ecological medicine, which I'll explain in a minute what that is, but it does involve looking at causes and seeing people actually getting better. This also involves preventive medicine. A lot of people come because they see everyone around them getting ill and they want to stay well. And that's because I was very lucky in the 90s, discovered the British Society for Ecological Medicine, which is a bunch of disillusioned doctors who felt like I did that something was missing in their training, but unlike myself in those early days, were finding answers. And so having spent 25 years working with nutrition, looking at the good stuff that's missing, in other words, working out why it's missing, even if people are eating an apparently good diet, putting the good stuff back in, and also working with the bad stuff that shouldn't be in there, which is toxins from environmental pollutions, the kind of chemicals that are in our air and our water and our soil and therefore our food now, which didn't exist before the Industrial Revolution, and with which our biochemical systems are ill-equipped to cope, more ill-equipped in some of us than in others. So I've learned that people can get better. I've learned that they can stay well once they've got better. And I've learned that it's actually very simple. Good stuff in, bad stuff out. But what happened was that a few years in, the patients and sometimes students and other practitioners sitting in with me would say, why doesn't my GP know all this? And then, will you please write it down? And so that's how I ended up writing the first book, because a lot of my patients were saying, look, nobody knows this stuff. I know how I got better. My GP's not interested. Please write it down. So that's why I wrote the first book. And it was actually my agent's suggestion to do it according to the seasons of the year. Because, as she rightly said to me, there's a lot of faddy diets out there. There's a lot of stark, raving, crazy diets that are far too extreme and not realistic and not sustainable in the ordinary old-fashioned sense of being able to keep it going. Can you write something about nutrition according to the seasons? So I did that, and then I had a long chapter called Seasons of Your Life, which is about how we need to live and eat very differently at different stages of the life. And it starts with preconception care, and it goes on to being 105 and don't dement, prevent, because we can maintain bone and brain into extreme old age if we know how. And then there's a little chapter about supplements and when you do and when you don't need them and how to avoid the rubbish ones. But the final chapter, which I called Tox Detox, you can't poison the planet without poisoning the people, is the one that sparked our most interest. Because let's be honest, there's a lot of good books about nutrition out there. And I hope mine is one of them, but it's one of thousands. So that's why the second book is all about industrial toxicity in our environment and how precisely those chemicals and electromagnetic waves that are damaging the birds and the bees and the badgers and the dolphins and the trees, what's killing the mosses, what's killing the otters, is precisely what's killing us. And it seems to me that nobody had been joining those dots. And there are these wonderful environmental campaigners out there fighting for the wildlife and the trees and thinking that what's killing them is climate change and habitat loss, and those things are absolutely real and devastating. But actually the wildlife is being poisoned. The thing is, we are wildlife, we are mammals, and the same is happening to us. And you might ask, what is the evidence for that? And that's what I discovered. I mean, I knew it through my clinical experience and that of my colleagues, but that's finite. What I discovered in writing this new book is that A, our modern epidemics really are epidemics, and B, the causes are not unknown. It turns out that we're eating the causes, drinking the causes, inhaling the causes, and some of us, especially us women, are rubbing the causes into our skin. These are all petrochemicals, and they're in our homes as well. And once you know what they are, where they're coming from, and what they do to us, it's remarkably easy to avoid them. The first thing I learned, really, at the British Society for Ecological Medicine is that we are in the midst of many, many epidemics, I would say pandemics, that we don't see. And we don't see because what's familiar becomes normal. So may I just do a very quick survey? Yes. Would you mind putting up your hand if you know or have ever known a person with cancer?
Right.
Okay, QED, that's almost everyone in the room. And those of you who didn't put your hand up, you'll go home tonight and think, oh, yeah, there was Auntie so-and-so. So that's not normal, but it's become completely normal. Had I asked the same question of a room full of people, equivalent people, same sort of profession, same sort of age, 100 years ago, maybe 3 or 4 hands would have gone up. 200 years ago, probably 1 hand or no hand. So cancer and heart disease and autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's thyroiditis, like rheumatoid arthritis, like multiple sclerosis, neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and diabetes, which, by the way, type 2 diabetes, when I was in medical school, was called mature onset diabetes because you got it if you were past 50. Now we're seeing it in children. All these illnesses were rare or unknown before the Industrial Revolution. The reason we can't see it is because of the phenomenon that ecologists call shifting baseline syndrome. And I learnt about it through Isabella Tree's book, Wilding. And what it is that what's familiar is normal, and that we can only think back to about the time of our own childhood. So if you're an ecologist seeing how many birds there are in this square mile of land, you'll say, gosh, there's only 5 species. And we know that 40 years ago, there were 10 species. But what they don't know is that 300 years ago, there were 50 species of birds, because the baseline to which we are trying to restore the bird population or our own health has shifted. And we cannot see that because we're bound by our own time. And I just finished that bit by saying, if you turn on the radio or read the newspaper, what you'll hear is increasingly the epidemic levels of illness that we're suffering from are being acknowledged, but the cause is being attributed to having an aging population. But it's because we're getting older. And the implication is that the wonders of modern medical science have enabled us to live long enough to get all these hideous diseases, and that previously we just died before that happened. Well, that's not true for two reasons. One is, very sadly, that cancer and autoimmunity and degenerative diseases in general and diabetes are going up much faster among the young than they are among the old. So colon cancer and throat cancer, for example, used to be diseases of the very elderly, and now we're seeing them in people in their 20s, and we can come later to what that's about. I refer to it in chapter 6 of the new book. So firstly, if it was aging, it wouldn't be happening more in younger people than older. Second is this. What we're told is if you go back to, say, the mid-19th century, the average age of death was 45. Well, the average age of death was 45, but that's because the average includes all the children who died before their 5th birthday, and that was a quarter of the whole population, of diseases which are to do with poor hygiene and malnutrition and appalling crowded living conditions. Take those kids out of the equation. They lived, on average, to the same age we do, into the mid-80s. But they didn't live their last decade in a twilight of suffering and disability and dependence. That's the difference. We're not living longer, we're living sicker. So I just wanted to clear up a few myths before we get going, and then we can talk about what to do about it all.
Whew! Yes. Well, that was amazing. Could I just ask, could we turn the music down just a little bit? Isn't it? Okay, party next door after this then. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I don't know where to start, but a question that occurred to me just now is, do you have any tips, just going a bit rogue here, for how we best use our GP's time in an 8-minute appointment? Sorry. And the reason I say that is because I know they say one thing at a time, but would you say one of the things you could do is to connect your own, start by making sure that you come from a base of connecting your own dots. So knowing your family history, taking an inventory around your home, taking an inventory of your diet. Do you have any tips to start there? Because I'm thinking when you said about why doesn't my GP know this? Well, we know straight away that they wouldn't have had the chance to learn it. And if we think about nutrition to begin with, we know that that's potentially one lecture your average GP had.
It's 1 or 2 lectures in medical school. I had 1 hour, and that hour on nutrition I now know was completely and utterly wrong. It's probably worth saying how it was wrong, actually.
Is it to do with fat?
No.
Oh.
There's that as well, but in terms of what your GP has been taught, right? Your GP has been taught that you need vitamin D to strengthen your bones, and you do. But the amount of vitamin D you need to do that is pretty low. What they haven't been taught is that you need vastly more vitamin D for your brain to work, and your immune system to work, and your hormone system to work. So here's a tip, if you want your GP to check your vitamin D level, which is a very useful thing to know, invent at least 2 grandmothers with osteoporosis. Well, actually, it can only be 2 because nobody has more.
Oh gosh, yes, of course. No. Sorry, where did I go there? Yeah. Okay, so 2 grandmothers with osteoporosis. Okay. Osteoporosis. God bless them. Okay.
And a mother with osteoporosis. Then you may get them to test your vitamin D. And the second tip is when they say, the receptionist says, it's okay. Say, no. The NHS normal range is set way too low. What are the numbers? And what are the units? Because it should be between 75 and 200 nanomoles per litre, or 50 to 80 milligrams per decilitre if they do it like that. So you need more than they think you need. But the thing about your GP is, God bless the NHS, I love it. I believe passionately in socialised medicine. But if you go with a bad rash on your skin and a wheeze in your lungs and painful arthritic joints, all they're going to do is refer you, respectively, to the dermatologist, the chest physician, and the rheumatologist, none of whom will ever meet or speak to each other. And if they did, they wouldn't know what to do. The whole point about ecological medicine is it sees the whole body as one joined-up ecosystem. So I would ask myself, what is causing inflammation in the skin and the lungs, and probably the gut as well, and the joints? And you look at all the bad stuff that's in there, you identify the toxins, you take them out, you look at the missing nutrients, you look at basic elements of the lifestyle like exercise and sunshine and sleep and rest and relaxation and meaningful occupation, as well as the physical, biological stuff. And usually you can get to the root of it. I mean, in that situation I described, I would look at the gut because, as they've known for 5,000 years in Chinese medicine, if the gut's wrong, the lungs and the joints and the skin will suffer as well. But ecological medicine is ecological in another, even deeper sense as well, which is it sees the human person within the wider ecosystem that is planet Earth. Right? What goes around comes around. We're breathing the air, we're drinking the water, we're eating the food that's grown in the soil, which has been sprayed with God knows what. So what we do to the planet, we do to ourselves. And I mean it in a literal biological way, not in a mystical way, although it is true on all levels. So that's why I've written a lot about soil and farming. And we went to some organic regenerative farms and we learned what they're doing. And we learned that it is perfectly possible to grow crops that are nutrient dense, nourishing, without any pesticides, without any synthetic fertilizers. And actually within a year or two, the yield is just as good or better. But there are large manufacturers of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers who are trying to convince governments around the world that if we are to feed the teeming billions that we'll have in 2050, we must do these intensive agricultural practices, which are denuding the soil, destroying the soil, contributing to erosion, contributing massively to climate change, partly because they're all petrochemicals, but also because when you destroy the soil, you lose the carbon. And, you know, these chemicals were developed as weapons of war. So what happened in 1945 was the manufacturers of the nerve gases, well, I mean, they could have said, there's no more call for this, jolly good, we'll go and do something else. We'll train to be tennis coach or something. They didn't. They repurposed their toxic chemicals to be used on the fields as insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, pesticides. But they were developed as nerve gases, so it is no coincidence that they are hugely implicated as contributory causes in diseases of the nervous system, like Alzheimer's, like Parkinson's disease, which was rare as hen's teeth 100 years ago, and now everyone over a certain age seems to be getting it. Multiple sclerosis, motor neuron disease, these hideous neurodegenerative conditions. Well, I thought maybe just my clinical experience, because I found these substances in the test, not blood test, a fat test, because these petrochemicals are lipophilic. They head for fatty tissue. The fattiest organ of the body is the brain. Maybe it's just my experience, but no, it's also the experience of my 100 or 200 colleagues in the British Society for Ecological Medicine. You find a neurological disease, you find pesticides. But hey, I thought, I can't put that in a book. It's clinical experience is these days dismissed as anecdotal evidence, whereas actually for hundreds of years, it's how medics and patients have taught each other this is what works. So I thought there must be some studies on this. And of course, I've been to lectures on this for 25 years, but I looked up the studies myself. And having thought my problem will be, how do I find half a dozen studies backing up this causal relationship? No, my problem was which of the thousands of studies that I have found do I select? And the frustrating thing about this is these are in peer-reviewed journals, proper pucker journals, which your GP has never heard of and your neurologist has never heard of, like Journal of the Total Environment, Environmental Health Perspectives. These connections are known, and they have been known for a long time. But as with so much in academia, the information fails to trickle down to the general public or even to physicians. So, yeah, it's out there. The synthetic fertilizers damage the soil, damage our health in much more indirect and complex ways. But the pesticides are toxic, and they're implicated not just in neurological disease, but in cancer, endocrinological problems like cancer of the breast, the prostate, endometriosis, polycystic ovaries, and infertility, which is a massive issue that, again, hardly existed 100 years ago. They had the opposite problem 100 years ago. So, yeah, this is what's in the soil. And it was really exciting to meet all these regenerative and organic farmers. And I've since met many of them at conferences because I'm speaking to gardeners and farmers, as well as
Yeah.
the nutritionists and naturopaths and medics, they're doing it, they're loving it, they're feeling healthier themselves. And it can be done, but how do we make organic food available to the general public and affordable? Because I'm always being told, oh, it's a middle-class luxury. There are dozens of good charities now in London and other big cities making organic food available at cost to local people through all sorts of food box schemes. And it's local and it's fresh. So it hasn't come from hundreds of miles away. It's not been air freighted in. It's not created pollution on the roads or in the air. And if it's local, it's fresh. And if it's organic, so much the better. But it could also be made available to everybody by government action, because the government should be subsidising the small, human-scale organic farms rather than the massive monocrop, agri-chemical, industrial agriculture that is taking over our green and pleasant land, and which is destroying the wildlife, just feeding the junk food industry, growing a lot of oilseed rape, which is actually not fit for human consumption, and wheat, which is going to feed the animals instead of humans, and, all of that could be turned around by government action. But if we know, we can make the choice, we can vote with our wallets. And if we're eating only organic food, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the best form of health insurance, if we're eating only organic food, we're not eating toxic pesticides, we're not eating food which is nutritionally deprived, because the synthetic fertilizers just put in potassium, phosphorus and nitrogen. And when I test people for mineral deficiencies, those are never ever deficient. What's deficient is the zinc, the magnesium, the selenium and the iodine and all the good minerals which the plants may not need, but animals like us who eat the plants do need. And you can force the plants to grow fast and thin and spindly with synthetic fertilizers, but you can't give them the nutrients that humans and other animals need. So, what's deficient in the soil is precisely what I find deficient in human patients.
Good.
Wow. I wanted to just say, in case you didn't know, I'm sure you do, Jenny, but Satopia Farm down in Woolwich is an amazing, do you know it? Amazing, has a community box scheme. You can go and learn, you can train. If I don't know what you all do in the room, and I love what you said about meaningful occupation. I'd love to talk a bit more about the living and working with purpose. But if you've got any skills to offer, you could go and certainly offer them to the wider community. I want to ask a few things. You said that we could talk about rates of bowel cancer going rapidly rising in the young. I wanted to touch on that. I was sort of laughing internally, but crying at the same time, thinking about how we have to differentiate between organic food and other food, because it used to just be food. Yeah. And now even when you go into a so-called organic shop or store, it's very difficult, isn't it, to actually work out which are the organic berries and which aren't, because often they're sort of, it's a place may say it's an organic shop, but really it's...
And it's even more complicated with animal produce like eggs or cheese or meat or poultry, because yes, you want it organic, but you absolutely want it free range as well. You want an animal that's lived, wandering around freely on the grass, pecking, not being fed corn and not being caged. The only way to guarantee that is to go with the Soil Association's logo, because if they certify it as organic, A, it's really organic, and B, it's free range as well. Here's where we have to be incredibly careful. There is regulation. You can't call food organic if it isn't, but you can call so-called personal care products, cosmetics,
tell us about this.
Shampoos, whatever. You can call them organic if they contain just 1% organic ingredients. And I discovered this by speaking to the person at the Soil Association who runs their non-food certification process.
So everything that's not food?
Everything that's not food.
Right.
So that's, your shampoo and conditioner and your moisturiser and your sunscreen.
Your toothpaste.
Your toothpaste and your perfume and all of that stuff and your soap. It's legal to call it organic if it's only 1% organic. So the way to deal with this is take your magnifying glass to the health food shop, which you should do anyway. If it's got an ingredients list, read it. If you're over 45, you can't read it without a magnifying glass. That's quite intentional. But when it comes to truly organic, if it's got the Soil Association logo on it, it is. And also if it's got Cosmos certification. I think as in cosmetics, not the Cosmos, but Cosmos is a Europe-wide association that includes the Soil Association and other European groups as a member. And that's how you know that it's really okay. And why this matters is that the skin is the largest organ of the body. It's a totally absorptive surface, and you shouldn't really put anything on your skin that you wouldn't put in your mouth and swallow.
Yeah.
You know, the safest moisturiser is coconut oil, which you can definitely eat. Organic coconut oil. So, yeah, we have to be really careful about what's in our homes as well. And I've got a whole chapter in the new book about indoor pollution, because we spend 90% of our time indoors. I mean, that is a problem in itself. We don't get enough sunlight. But, you know, the things we're using in our home, like what I've started calling the personal scare products.
That's brilliant.
Which we can make completely
So that's a good
safe.
thing we could do this weekend.
Every
Inventory of our
single one
personal
of them.
scares. Yeah.
Every single one of them has got a safe herbal alternative, right? And they're not hard to find, and I detail in the book how to find them. That you can get completely herbal, safe, natural soap, shampoo, all of these things. Nail varnish is a bit on the edge, but so long as you put it on outdoors in the fresh air, there's no harm once it's on the nails. It's
Did you just look at my nails?
I've never used it in my life.
I actually stopped with nail varnish when I was trying to conceive.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a big thing for me. Deodorant.
Yeah.
And a big thing that I've really struggled with my partner, because he says he wants that minty fresh feel, is toothpaste. And then, of course, I showed him some of your work, and I showed him some articles, because, you know, he's now very up on his probiotics and his gut health. And then I said, oh, but do you know about oral dysbiosis? Do you know about, the part your mouth plays in gut health? And that's how I think I've got him.
Right.
But yeah, that was a big one.
Okay,
that
so
feel.
tell him he can-
Yes, what am I telling him?
He can have his cake and eat it, metaphorically, right? So you've got plenty of fresh minty toothpaste that hasn't got fluoride or any toxic detergents in it. We can come on to fluoride later. It's a vexed issue. But there's also detergent in conventional toothpaste that does the gut lining no good when you swallow it. It does the mouth lining no good. So green people, for example,
Yes.
do a simple mint-flavoured toothpaste, which has got no nasties in it.
And is flossing important as well? Have I
It
read something
is.
about flossing and a link with preventing dementia or...
Well, preventing heart disease and increasingly, they think, dementia, dental hygiene in general. But if you've got dental floss, that's great, but look at whether it's got fluoride in it.
Oh.
They're putting fluoride in everything. Drops, toothpaste, dental floss, mouthwash.
Yeah.
We have to talk about fluoride, don't we?
Let's talk about fluoride. And also, I'm very conscious that time will run, and I can see so many people nodding, and I can hear your yims when Jenny says something. So I want to make sure we've got lots of time for you to ask questions. So could we quickly talk about fluoride? Could we quickly, and that's not me rushing you just because I'm aware, could we talk about bowel cancer? And then please get ready we're going to have a roving mic coming around. So please, we'd like to get through to as many of your questions as possible.
Okay, so there's all sorts coming out of your tap, because the water companies, the privatised water companies, all they do is take the bad bugs out. You know, it's fair enough, we don't want cholera from the water, but they use chlorine to do that, which is a toxic halogen, and pushes iodine out of the body, which is essential for the health of the breast, the thyroid, the prostate, and so on. And actually, there's another way. In Holland, I'm not supposed to say that anymore, it's the Netherlands, okay. In the Netherlands, they use ultraviolet light to kill all the bad bugs in the water. So the Dutch are not drinking chlorine. So there's another way to do that. So that's chlorine. If your neighbour is on antidepressants or oral chemo or any other drugs,
Or taking cocaine.
or taking cocaine, I suppose, they're peeing out the residue. It goes into the water table. The water companies have no method for taking out that, or the heavy metals, or the remnants of hormones that people are taking, or a pill, HRT, whatever. And indeed, the residues of pesticides and synthetic fertiliser that come off the fields into the water supply. They don't take any of that out. So get a water filter, as well as eating organic. Ideally, if you can afford it, a plumbed-in water filter. So not only are you not drinking chlorine in your cup of tea, you're not bathing in it and inhaling it in the shower and the bath, and not rinsing your nice organic vegetables in chlorine. Now, fluoride is not yet added to the tap water everywhere in the UK. It has been in the Birmingham and the West Midlands and in the Republic of Ireland's drinking water since 1964. And Boris Johnson's government passed the Health and Social Care Bill, which if you scrutinise it, you see, I think it's clause 147 and 148, the plan to add fluoride to the drinking water to every part of this country. Well, thank goodness for ineptitude and incompetence. It hasn't happened yet. There's a battle about it in the northeast of England. It's already in the water in Cheshire. There was a battle in Southampton. The point is, fluoride is not a nutrient. It has no role in human metabolism whatsoever. And like chlorine, it's a toxic halogen that pushes out essential iodine. Right. So what's it doing in the water supply? Well, what we're told is it's good for children's teeth, prevents tooth decay. Preventing tooth decay means cutting down sugar and brushing your teeth. That's all you need to do. Cut out the sugar and brush your teeth, okay? If you look at graphs of how dental decay in kids has declined since the 1960s, it's come down and down and down. Exactly the same rate in countries where they have added fluoride to the water and countries where they haven't added fluoride to the water. So it's made no difference to dental health, but it can damage the bones. And we know that the fracture rate in postmenopausal women is higher where there's fluoride in the water. Paradoxically, even though fluoride makes the bones denser, it also makes them more brittle and more vulnerable to breaking because it distorts the architecture of the bone. It's also implicated in osteosarcoma, a rare and sadly often fatal primary bone tumour in young people, especially young people, and it damages the brain. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies showing it lowers IQ in children if they're exposed to fluoride in the tap water, or in Mexico they've added it to the salt in the womb or in their first 2 or 3 years. Gosh. It damages children's brains, and it also damages the ovary and the kidney and of course the thyroid by pushing out iodine. So what on earth is it doing in our tap water? And sadly, this is where we have to follow the money. Where's it all coming from, all this fluoride? Who's making it? Turns out no one's making it in order to save children's teeth. It is a byproduct, a toxic waste product of the phosphate fertilizer industry. I was completely horrified when I discovered this. Now, when it leaves their factories, it is legally classified as hazardous waste. When it's added to the water supply all over America, nowhere in Europe, mainland Europe, it's reclassified as water treatment agent. Interesting, it's not reclassified as a medication, because if it were, it would have to go through all sorts of tests of safety, which it would fail with flying colours. So don't buy it. Even if there isn't fluoride in your local water supply, get a water filter. Join the campaigns, which you can find out about in my book, to stop them adding fluoride to the water. This is solving massive companies' waste disposal problems. It is not helping children's teeth, and it is lowering IQ. Now, I have had several children come to see me from the Republic of Ireland and from Birmingham. It took me about 10 years in practice before I saw the pattern. I thought, I'm just getting kids from these areas because people have told other people. But what I saw was in those kids, I would measure the urinary fluoride through the roof, and I would measure their urinary iodine. And the lab would ring me up and say, can you send another sample? Because we just couldn't find any iodine. It must be an error at our end. No, it wasn't an error. No iodine, all pushed out by the fluoride. So what do? All the general detox methods and nutritional methods which are described in both books, but primarily give them iodine, because you need to replace that and it pushes the fluoride out, and ask them to install a water filter. And that is all, but it is huge. And with most of these kids, you can repair the brain damage. They start becoming able to speak and read and write and add up. You can't repair the bone damage. They have really weird waddling gaits, and they need physio, and it seems the bone damage is permanent, but you can get their brains working again if you get the fluoride out. So filter your water.
We're filtering our water, aren't we? We are filtering our water. Shall we go on to questions? Thank you for being such an incredible community here in this room today. If you're up for it, on your way home, before you turn your phone off for the night, maybe tell a few people about how incredible Dr. Jenny is, and maybe share 1 or 2 things. Maybe let them know that you've got a book, or send one of her podcast episodes. That would be incredible. And Dr. Jenny, thank you so much I've heard you speak so many times and I'm always blown away by how amazing you are. So thank you very much.
Well, Melissa, it's been wonderful to be in conversation with you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And thanks to Conduit, of course, for having us.